Hi, I'm Richard Lang. Welcome to AEROPS. Today we have a very special person that we're going to interview. His name is Lieutenant Colonel John Blitch. Dr. Blitch has a bachelor's degree in civil environmental engineering from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He's got a master's degree in math and computer science from Colorado School of Mines. He's got a master's degree and a doctorate degree in cognitive psychology from Colorado State University. Dr. Blitch was a senior research scientist at the 711th Human Performance Wing at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, in the field of cognizant psychology and neuroscience. He worked as an operations research analyst at the U.S. Special Operations Command and then was a program manager at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA. John's operational experience includes 5 tactical command tours in nuclear artillery, special operations, and hostage rescue. Blitch was introduced to the Space Technology Hall of Fame for his role in technology transfer between the U.S. Department of Defense and NASA in mobile robotics, a truly distinguished individual of impeccable credibility. Aerospace Research Operations is an organization that's domiciled in Virginia and registered with the State Corporation Commission. Also known by the acronym AEROPS, which is a scientific research cooperative that's focused on unidentified anomalous phenomena and the associated high strangeness and paranormal effects that typically result after an encounter. Hey, John, I just wanted to tell you that everybody at AeroOps is really excited to have you participate in this interview and be a part of our YouTube channel. I just want to really thank you personally. It's everyone. Everyone here has a great respect for you and the work that you've done, and it's really an honor to talk to you today.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate everything you've been doing to keep this, disclosure train moving along and tugging on the oars of the good ship humanity, Richard.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, we're working towards that, and I've been doing this for a long time, but in the last year or so, there's so much stuff happening, and I'm really starting to get very encouraged that we're going to get some really, really cool, really good results, and the public's going to end up knowing what's really going on. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, I've seen your interviews where you talked about your own personal abduction when you're on your bicycle. Do you want to just give me some real brief, like what happened there?
Sure. What I had indicated before is that amidst a storm front of anomalous experiences throughout my life, even from childhood on.
Right.
I have always dismissed those under the rigorous, lens of skepticism that my father and my mother, both scientists, sociologist, and an aerospace physicist, sort of brought me up in. So I never gave much credence to them other than being a typical childhood nightmare.
Right.
But it wasn't until that missing time experience on that mountain bike that I couldn't push it away, because dreams don't transport you to, you know, 10 miles away. They don't,
And
they
then
don't,
get you a ride in a police car on the way home.
and
Yeah.
get you a ride in a police car and have your wife call the police after taking your 2 daughters up and down this ridge line, screaming and yelling for you. That's not a nightmare. And as I mentioned to Ross, dreams don't leave 3 little bruises on the inside of your bicep. And so that's why, I do like the term experiencer. I like the way that we use that as categorizing, this notion of anomalous experiences. But for me, those bruises indicate that I didn't want to go. So that to me is the definition of an abduction.
Well, let me ask you this, so that and we were talking offline before we started. it seems to me like, in my career, I've interviewed a lot of abductees, and back in the day, it was really taboo. MUFON and those organizations didn't want to talk about it. What do you think in terms of, just looking at this generally, what do you think as far as how frequently this actually might be occurring? And do you have any thoughts as far as what percent of the population might be have been involved in this? And I think it's probably a lot more than I might have guessed a few years ago.
Yeah. So in keeping with the it's not just tradition, but the rigor of scientific literature, I'm going to refer you back to folks that did the work on this: John Mack, Bud Hopkins, and I think even David Jacobs was involved, a Roper poll, and they very conservatively, after using that survey data collection process, they ultra conservatively came out to 1% of the population. Now
Wow.
let that sit for a minute, right? 1% of 8 billion people across this planet. That means there are many millions of us. Now, here's the thing: when you look at this from a biology standpoint, a behavioral science standpoint, and you look at Jane Goodall hanging out with gorillas, right? Trying to interact with them and explore them and understand them. And then you look at other scientific um, studies where we use duck blinds so that the beings that we're trying to observe and understand their behavior, whether they be elephants or other primates, and we don't want them to know that we're watching them. It makes all the sense in the world that this could be going on from an intergalactic aspect. So if you can get over the 1947 sound barrier, where Chuck Yeager, it's a very interesting year, right? Chuck Yeager breaks the sound barrier. There are many people that predicted, many scientists that said it could not be done. And yet, boom, there's the X-15 and off we go. So how far away are we from the faster than light barrier, right? And if we get beyond that, the notion that we are being studied by a wide variety of entities, just like humans study wildlife here, that suggests a large cross section of us, maybe. So large being 1%, right?
Well, and the other thing, when you said about the duck blind thing, the research, most of the people I've interviewed typically have their memory blocked, so they couldn't remember what happened to them. And only through like the use of regression hypnosis that we've really gotten to dig into the understand what, basically you're talking to someone's subconscious and they're just replaying what they experienced. But in their conscious mind, it's been blocked so they can't remember it. So that's, I think, in a part of it. If they're real, if there's a billion, 1% of the population has been exposed to that, most of them don't even know that they don't consciously recall having that happen to them, which is a really good point.
Yeah, right. And one of the most important aspects of that you really got to wonder about, right, from a skeptical standpoint. Okay, so all these crazy people are going to hypnotherapists, and the hypnotherapists are putting thoughts in their brains, right? Putting their
Yeah,
thoughts in their minds or whatever. What you
yeah.
have to ask yourself is, why did they go pay John Mack $300 an hour to start with? Why are they going to shell out a hefty fee to begin with? That
Because
doesn't make
something
sense.
subconsciously is bothering them. Yeah.
Something's bothering them, right? Some sort of level. And I've said this before many times, that you know the removal of traumatic memory, that's a compassionate thing. That makes sense, and it's also scientifically valid, right? Because look at the way behavioral science in throughout human society requires a institutional review board to review your protocols so that you're not harming the people that are participating in this study. So that the notion of informed consent. Well, sometimes if you really want to get to very difficult, challenging behavioral study components, you can't tell them the full deal. There's got to be a little bit of deception in there.
Yeah.
So what you do is you tell them that we're looking for this and you're actually looking for this. And then you debrief them after the fact and they're like, oh, okay, that's fine.
Well,
But what
when
Stanley
you,
Milgram, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, blocking memory is like something that they can do it medically. Like there's certain types of medical procedures. I think, for example, a colonoscopy, they give you a drug so that you can't remember what happened to you. And it just, you just can't remember, even though you're semi-conscious. So it's doable that you could wipe somebody's memory off. There's no question about that.
Well, there's no question that we can do it prospectively, right? So we can inject you right now. I could inject you right now, and plus or minus 30 seconds, you would not remember anything past that injection. And what's going on there is pharmacologically, that's going into your hippocampal region, which is a very vulnerable region of the brain, and it will disrupt that memory consolidation process. But that doesn't mean that we can go back to what you and I were discussing 20 minutes ago and get rid of that. No, anteriorly, not so going backwards, not the case, because that's already out there in the cortical region. So I use this analogy of a random access memory on your computer versus the hard drive. It's not a great analogy, but it's the best we got.
I've
And so
used something similar to that in one of my books. It's like the RAM is like
yeah.
what's on the computer. That's what our consciousness, but then your subconscious is like the hard drive where everything is apparently recorded. And I remember interviewing when we were working on the Bledsoe case, the doctor that did the regression. I remember him telling me, he said that he worked with John Mack, and he said, he goes, I can regress you back to second grade to some event that may have happened. And he goes, I can have you go around the room and tell me what color shirt every kid in the room has on. That's how detailed that subconscious memory could possibly be.
Well, absolutely. And here's the thing: this is not woo-woo. This is
No.
scientifically validated, and it's not just science. You look at our judicial system. When I looked into this about 6 months ago, there were two people on death row that were partially convicted or convicted partially on testimony recovered under hypnosis. In many courtrooms, and it's usually on a county basis, many courtrooms throughout the United States of America, evidence from a hypnotic regression is admissible in court. And so
Yeah.
it's not woo.
Well, and
It
that's the
is
same thing that goes with, we've had this discussion before about working with abductees. Travis Walton back in the day sort of, you know, the whole idea where they used the lie detector tests on these guys. I
right.
personally think that a lie detector test is not a real reliable way to evaluate someone's abduction situation, but much more realistically to use regression hypnosis.
Well, yeah. So the way I look at it, it's like evidence. When I was a military commander, you had all sorts of intelligence come in, right? So each one gets a rating in terms of reliability and
Yep.
impact, right? An A1 versus a C3 source, whatever. So it's all data to assess and evaluate. So if you've got radar from one ship, space-based radar from a satellite, and a personal observer on the water, in the water,
Right.
three independent sources all zeroing in on this tic tac or whatever you want to talk about, or a being, then they holistically present evidence that can be pretty strong.
Well,
So the more
Considering that
sources,
lie
the better.
detector tests won't hold up in court, but regression hypnosis will sort of tells you something too,
Yeah, it depends on the court, and there's a lot of interpretation that's important there for sure, I believe.
So let me ask you this. When I was, in the day when I was doing my interviews with abductees, you started to get this, there people were starting to talk about what we call MILABs. And basically they were saying that that they were abducted and examined somewhere, and that there was uniformed military officers present at that. And when I kept hearing that, I'm like, man, you gotta be kidding me. That can't, but un apparently it happens because there's a whole bunch of people that are saying that's happening. What do you think about that?
I was in total disbelief of it throughout the '90s. Uh, I I just couldn't. There are too many good, solid brothers and sisters in arms that I knew that I couldn't. It was very difficult for me to expand my worldview that might have been happening. But after I retired from DARPA the first time in 2001, and then again in 2002, and then went on my own and had a little more time to explore this a little bit more, it did seem to be that there were some credible reports. And then I guess in 2018, when I saw Terry Lovelace tell his story, it really shook me up. But before that, I remember a number of folks sharing with me their stories, military folks saying that there were military people involved in their uh, experiences. So I did go to a UFO conference, and probably I think the second one that I'd ever attended, and I confronted Sergeant Major Robert O. Dean, just a magnificent, heroic figure in my world. He was, when I went to church on Sundays, he was the kind of guy that I was expecting to see on the altar.
Mhm.
Just very powerful, but very kind and benevolent, but
Mhm.
wise, almost a JC sort of personality. Have enormous respect for him. I think he's enormously respected throughout the community. But I confronted him and I said, "Look, Sergeant Major, I told him a little bit about my background
Right,
in
right.
the special ops world, and I confronted him and I said, is there any possibility that our brothers and sisters in arms are involved in this?" And he was embarrassed, Richard. He looked at the floor. He had his cane at
Mhm.
that time, and he was tapping on the floor, which is very irregular for him. It's anomalous for him because he's such a straight shooter. And then he looked at me straight in the eye, which was normal for him, and he said, "Yes,
Mhm.
but you
Wow.
got to understand, we had no choice. They were going to do it anyway, and they were allowing us to ride along and be observers." And then we had some discussion about, the blue UN helmets, where you
Hmm.
have troops on the ground as observers without weapons in many cases. And all they're doing is reporting back whether or not peace has been um,
Gotcha.
established. So this comes to mind in the context of this recent kerfuffle with Zelensky and Trump in the Oval Office last Friday, right?
Right.
So at some point you need observers to make sure that the protocols that have been agreed upon are adhered to, right? So you need somebody observing, and so that's what I have come to believe. This is not knowledge, this is belief, because I never saw any military people in any of my experiences, but I do have very credible friends and colleagues who have. And so that's what I think they are. They're primarily observers. And I do
Well,
have one
go
very
ahead.
special colleague. Well, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish that because I had thought what the next thing I was going to is if there's protocols, then there must have been some kind of an agreement.
Yeah. And he implied that. He implied that the alleged Eisenhower treaty
Yep.
was true. And he had seen a very detailed document when he was on staff duty at Shape headquarters in the 60s. I want to say 67, maybe 66,
Hmm.
that time frame. And that's what got him into all this. And that's why he had the inside scoop, because that was while he was on active duty as a sergeant major. Um, so a lot of independent corroboration there. But fast forward to more recently in a get together that I kind of co-sponsored here last summer, where a bunch of our I call it the Nuke X Brotherhood, the
Yeah.
Nuclear Experiencer Brotherhood. We had a
Right. Right.
campfire at Robert Hastings' house, and Jeff Goodrich shared the part of his experience that was arguably, I guess, they cut it out from the 3 or 4 hours that they filmed him, and he explained that after one of his abduction experiences, there was a second one, and the second one was a MILAB, and it seemed that the focus of that was they were trying to get intelligence on what the other guys had done to him. So you got two people taking this poor guy, you know, uh, and it
And
and it
and, and
and it
I've
was
encountered that too with people I've interviewed where they were abducted, and then later a non a human team for in various ways either came to their house, took them an ambulance, or one lady said that she thought were police that stopped her on the road and they took her away somewhere and basically took them and examined them, and they were trying to figure out what the ETs did to them is what I think is going on.
yeah. And I don't want to speak for Jeff, but I will say that and he would be a great guy to interview for your show. By the way, I'll get you guys linked up if you'd like,
Awesome. Please,
because
yeah.
he needs to tell his own story. But the thing that really stood out to me was that the second abduction, as he describes it, and I hope I get this right, and I hope Jeff forgives me if I don't get it right, but hopefully I'll have a chance to correct it if I screw it up. Was the second abduction? There was a panel of I think an Army and an Air Force colonel, and then three ETs, or three, I shouldn't say ETs, non-human intelligence. I don't know if
Oh,
they're so it was like a panel, and the impression that he got, that he shared with us, was that they were trying to gather intelligence on these other guys that had taken him, whoever those other NHI were. So that makes all the sense in the world to me, and it
that's
helps me
consistent with what
respond.
I've been told too. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's consistent with the military job of protecting us, right? If there are folks out there that are doing this type of thing, it's almost like it's, with your background in law enforcement, that's what you would do, right? You would go investigate and try to understand in more detail. So that all holds up in my book in terms of logic as to where things go. But yeah, so he would be a great guy to talk to for your show.
Yeah, if you could get us connected, I'd be grateful. That'd be awesome. Um,
We'll do.
yeah, and the thing that um, like one of the things that I just wanted to touch on, of course, and you've been involved in is, recently with Jake Barber talking to Ross about his experiences. And, I've written about that stuff in my books, Crash Recovery, and it was really nice to have them guys come out and publicly saying that that's what was really going on. And I mean, the whole thing with I mean, he's picking something up with a helicopter, and then he like there's a psionic effect where he's communicating with something on a subconscious level or a conscious level, but psychically communicating with them, which is like really interesting. And I think that we're going to learn a lot more about that, and also about psionic assets. I've known, I have several people that I know that can actually do that. They can go out in some field somewhere and they can pull something in. And like a good friend of mine, one of my team members, investigators, had told me that he did that one day. He took some of his friends, like early 20s, and went out and called something in. And he goes, it scared those guys so bad. I felt so bad about that. I never did it again, you know. But even so, and the thing that I find is disturbing is when they're talking about using psionic assets to like attract something, and then they're attacking it and trying to, knock it down or disable it, which is that sort of a little scary in my world, but I'm not sure how that's all going to unfold either. Um, but the other thing too is in one of the things that I've always thought, and it's starting to come out a lot now. Matt Ford had a really good interview last night about all these occurrences where the people are on these nuclear missile silo bases, and they're down in the command center, and all of a sudden a UAP comes over the field and shuts the missiles down. Um, I knew that I've seen maybe a half a dozen interviews about that over the last 10 or 15 years, but according to what they were talking about last night, this is happening all the time at most of the nuclear facilities, which sort of makes you wonder if the non-humans, the ETs, if you will, they seem to be real interested or even worried about how that, like nuclear devastation could occur. And I just thought that was really interesting. You've worked around that stuff a little bit. I don't know if you ever encountered it or not, but
I so I know a lot of the folks that have testified or have been willing to testify to that effect. Robert Hastings wrote that phenomenal book, sort of the
yeah, he was the one interviewed last night on Matt Ford's show. Yeah,
yep, yep. And so he was kind of the co-sponsor of this event this summer, where a lot of us got together, and Bob Salas and a lot of the other missileers in the Air Force that were in the capsule underground.
right, right.
And then you have Mario Woods and Jeff Goodrich and a lot of the guys that were on the surface, Terry Lovelace on the surface, who were direct experiencers, as opposed to the missileers, the missile launch officers underground. Uh, as a Pershing 2 missile battery commander, we had nothing underground. We were all surface. Uh, and thank God we got rid of those things. My God. But so I don't have any direct indicators of that. I do have one anomalous experience that I'm still exploring, and it's just not
Yeah.
compelling enough and doesn't pass the rigor to even discuss. But the thing about it for me is that the the overwhelming feeling that we get. You mentioned Jake's
Right,
impression
right,
of love that he got from this
right, right.
craft that
Yeah,
he was following. It wasn't the egg; it was the he called the eight-gon or octagon.
yeah.
Um, that's very important. That emotional content and the emotional um, response that I have heard time and time again that seems to be replete throughout this, and I'm pretty sure Robert is in vigorous agreement with this, is that you know we are kids playing with matches. I have a chapter called "Nuclear Matchsticks" in my book where I talk about this whole thing. Is that that it's a sign of compassion. It's not a devious thing that they're trying to disarm us.
I agree.
It's
I think,
child's play. It
yeah,
is child's play for them to shut them all down. And I have often wondered in the wild speculative world that we're talking about here, since this isn't a scientific conference, um, how do we know that every single fissile core of every single nuclear weapon is really going to explode now? They may have been able to disable all of them. And we're just playing games with these dead nuclear weapons. How do we know? You
well,
know,
it'd be a
it's
nice
just,
thought if they did disable them all. As long as they disable everybody's, you're okay, I think. But
well, wait a minute. But there's a dark side to that, right? And
go
this is
ahead.
the dark side. If if nobody's nukes work all of a sudden, wow, is that destabilizing? Does does Pakistan now consider itself on the same level of influence as China and Russia and the US? If you so so it's kind of like Okay, if everybody's got a pistol and you put them in the woods, uh, then all it takes is 2 pounds of pressure, right? So you don't have to be a big brute to be able to compete. You could be a little person without much physical capability. As long as you can pull that trigger, you're good. But now you take the guns away, and now the big brutes have a big advantage. So I can understand why in the governments around the world, especially the nuclear equipped governments around the world, might not want that secret to get out, that none of our nukes work. This is wild speculation, but
Well, we
I'm wondering about the factors behind this 80 years of secrecy. That may be one of them.
Well, it seems all the research I've done for my books, it does seem that they're very interested in our nuclear weapons, storage facilities, and silos and all that kind of thing. Um, and
But
and
it's beyond just interest. It's not just passive monitoring.
oh, I'm with you. Yeah, I mean they
Yeah,
can,
they have
but and it,
actively disabled, enabled, started, stopped, as if the message they're sending is, kids, quit playing around. We're going to take your matches away.
well, I mean it's like I used to call it monkeys playing with hand grenades. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Sooner or later,
that's right.
everything's going to get blown up, and
Right.
if you look at the quantum physicists are saying now that when you detonate a nuclear device, the energy from that transcends outside this time-space reality into other dimensions, and it interrupts the fabric of space, which is an obvious, problem from a galactic perspective. A galactic community could be a little bit nervous about us doing that. So it'll be interesting to see if they
Or
come.
or an interdimensional community,
Yes,
right?
that's
Yes,
what I'm
absolutely.
saying. Yeah, exactly. And clearly, in the research in my book, the first book I wrote was called The Methodology of the New Age, and there's several chapters in there talking about multidimensional existences and higher level of consciousness, which where a lot of this stuff is the answers to a lot of these questions are in other dimensions. And as time goes on, we're gonna know more about that. So, two more questions I want to ask you. One, there's a new movie coming out, The Age of Disclosure. It's going to be out in the middle of this month sometime. I've seen the trailer for it, and there's a lot of guys out there that are totally stand-up guys like you that are pretty directly talking about ET stuff. I'm curious, what do you think's that's gonna have a big impact, I think.
I think so. I did. So I met Dan Farah, and I don't think my film stuff is going to appear in there. I don't think the abduction phenomena is going to be addressed in there at all.
Okay.
But I'm still looking forward to it, like everybody else. And you've got some really heavy hitters there, so I'm very excited about it. But I want to back up to the consciousness discussion just for 1 second to make one
By all
point,
means.
and I haven't made this point yet. Yet in any of the 5 or 6 interviews I've done, when you look at the way to interact with different species at different levels of sophistication, telepathy makes all the sense in the world.
Yes.
Instead of the Star Trek communication device, working with these lower beings, and communicating feelings to them makes all the sense in the world. It cuts through all this tripping over legalese and misinterpretation of what was said and what was not said. So that's why the emotional component of this is so important. The emotional component of what Jake conveyed in his experience with that ape gone, and the emotional component that the vast majority of Robert Hastings' witnesses have all come away with, which is, we got to shut this stuff down. We're just, I made a big point about it in one of my interviews about practicing lobbing nuclear cannonballs from West Germany into East Germany. It's not just that you're going into a different area, but the same country. People are speaking the same language. It would have been like a nuclear weapon launched from the north into the south during our Civil War. Crazy, but it's worse than that because you're launching those radiological effects into the future because of the half-life of the contamination that you're sending. So in order to, we really need to pay more attention to the conscious emotional component of these interactions because it transcends the verbiage. People, we're looking at symbols and there's no reason not to look at symbols. It makes all the sense in the world. I love what Lou's doing when he's talking about hieroglyphics on the side of craft and so forth and so on. But it's almost taken off the table if you can communicate telepathy wise. And again,
Well, I think
like hypnosis, telepathy is not woo-woo anymore. It is scientifically validated.
well,
Go
I
ahead.
think
Sorry.
the thing that I've learned about that is that telepathy and consciousness aren't constrained by our time space reality. They're uh, I remember back when I was in college, they talked about those experiments where the astronauts did ESP experiments. And, the guys up there orbiting the moon and the other guys sitting down here in Houston Space Center, and they're looking at cards and symbols and the
Edgar
accuracy.
Mitchell.
Yeah,
Yeah, Edgar
exactly.
Mitchell
And
wrote about that.
the accuracy was identical to when they were sitting across the table from each other. But the thing they learned is that the time that, when you would talk to the guys on the moon and they'd talk and Houston Control would talk back, you'd hear this bleep, which is the end of transmission signal. And it takes about 2.5 seconds for a radio signal to get from the Earth to the moon and back, about the speed of light. But when those guys were doing those telepathy experiments, the results were instantaneous. There's no time, they weren't constrained by time. And I think the same thing, if you could be on another planet and telepathically talk to someone, and it's just the distance and the time isn't a constraint.
Well, in the quantum physics, the science behind it is confirmatory of that. It jives with that because the spin on those subatomic particles, they change instantaneously as well. So it's not woo-woo. It is science-based. That is absolutely
I
the case.
I agree with you.
Quantum entanglement.
Yes, yes. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you about is I know you have a new book coming out. I just wanted you to tell us a little bit about it. There's a picture of it up on the screen right now, but tell me what the book's about and when it's going to be available.
Yeah, so it's the title's the Abduction Amnesty Not KNOT,
Hmm.
and it's the subtitle is A Path Towards Forgiveness in the Disclosure Age. So it's all about forgiveness. I
Awesome.
talk about when I was an altar boy as a young teenager, preteen, and how had gone downstairs. Well, I had for my the first time I ever listened to a sermon, and our rector was Episcopalian church. Our rector upstairs had this. He was kind of like Sergeant Major Dean, huge, powerful, very gentle bent of a man. And he was talking about forgiveness and so forth. And then I went downstairs to Sunday school, and my Sunday school teacher was talking about the Great Flood. And I'm like, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. The guy upstairs was just telling me that God forgives everybody. And then down here, you're telling me that God is wiping everybody out because of all the, Sodom and Gomorrah, the whoring and the bad
Yeah.
behavior. So I couldn't resolve it. So this notion of forgiveness is really my attempt to try to use this uh, phenomenon, this subject matter, to try to unite us after all this red, blue in the U.S., but it's across the globe, right? When you look at Russia, Ukraine, all the rest of this has the potential to unite us as a species. And so the first thing we got to do is put forgiveness at the top of the list to include three three types of forgiveness. One, forgive our own government for
Yes.
lying to us for 80 years
Right.
because they were just like our parents with Santa Claus, right?
Yep.
Uh, there's no monsters. There's nothing that's going to take you out of your bed or off of your mountain bike, right?
Yep.
There's no such thing as the little guys with the back eyes. Don't worry about it. It's all just science fiction. And now we know that that is total BS, that you have been
Right.
lying to us.
Right.
And so I was willing to forgive my parents as long as they came clean and admitted, yep, that was us putting the presents under the tree. And I caught them red handed. We, society, have caught our own government red handed. How
Exactly.
many
Good way to
times?
explain it. Yeah.
You know, I mean, you have caught our government red handed. A lot of ufologists over the years, thousands of incidents where we have caught our parents putting the presents under the tree, caught them red handed. And so, if you want us to forgive you for lying to us, for harassing our own soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, for arguably inspiring Paul Benowitz to commit suicide.
Yeah.
I mean, these heinous mechanisms that our government has used to keep this undercover. If you want us to forgive you for that, and you should, if you want to hold on to power, then you got to come clean. That's my main objective. And the second objective is to forgive them. Because as Terry Lovelace talked about with his Dr. Bug guy, he's like, hey, dude, I'm just doing my job.
Right.
Just
They're
quit
following
swarming
orders.
around.
Yeah.
Let us get this done. We're going to do a little bit of adjustment on your body. We can't touch your soul. So they're just scientists, right? Just like I used to use protocols on my human participants in my research. They are doing the same with us. And the vast majority of it is less than benevolent. It is terrifying. And we want them to stop. We're the dolphins in the net saying, hey, knock it off. We're the sentient ones, right? Quit messing with us. Let us out of the net.
Yeah.
Or the polar bears, whatever. And then the third is to forgive ourselves and to recognize, look, government, we know you can't protect us, and it's okay. It's all right. We understand it. Thanks for trying, but quit lying to us, for crying out loud. And so that's the three-way level. And for parents who, and I know this has happened, it's replete throughout the experiencer world. They have a very difficult time forgiving themselves for not being able to protect their own kids, their own family.
Well, I think
Right?
that's part of it
And
too, is like a
prevent them
lot
from
of
getting.
the work that's being done to try to, bring the disclosure thing forward. The forgiveness or amnesty is going to have to be a part of that, because if you want these guys to come clean and say, okay, here's what we've been really doing, you got to say, okay, you come clean, tell us what you're doing. We're not going to lock you up or arrest you or anything. We just want to know that's the price of finding the truth. And so I'm agreeing with you. I think that's probably a good way to end this, but that's a good thought.
It's the only way forward. Anything
I,
else is just going to go down the toilet bowl.
I
It's
agree.
horrific.
I agree.
Look at
Well, listen,
look at the way Lou Elizondo and Dave Grush were treated after coming out as whistleblowers. Even the people, even in ufology, the people that say, please tell us, and then they tell you, and then you come after them. I mean, so we've got to rise above this
well,
at
and that's
some
an
level.
element of protection for whistleblowers that they're trying to work
Yeah,
out in Congress too, for
right,
sure, with David Gresh and
right,
Lou, people like that are really
right.
heroes for America.
True heroes.
Well, listen,
Absolutely.
I know you've got another appointment, man. I really want to thank you for taking the time to come on here. This has been a really good hour that we spent together, and I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that our listeners, our viewers, are going to really appreciate watching this. So,
Well, I learned a lot from you as well, Richard. Thank you for your time. This has been wonderful.
thank you for everything, and I just want to know how much that we really appreciate it. Please check out our website at AEROPS.site. You'll be able to find current posts, new information, and a list of advisory board members. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.